you, Joe, and also compliments from my side. The media sector is one of these sectors in which we've seen in the past months and years very active experimentation with AI along the entire product value chain. And it's also a sector that is so important for our democratic society and the realization of many of our core fundamental freedoms and public values. And also in the past years, we also have seen that side, a lot of discussion and concern about the role of this media sector in this area. And because of this societal importance, I think this work group is extra important because you issue guidance and try to inform how media, also the media sector, of how to deal with this new powerful technology. And in our research here at the University of Amsterdam and our many conversations with media organizations, we have seen much demand for such guidance. I also would like to point to the work of the Council of Europe. There is a committee on AI freedom of expression, and that I'm chairing right now, where we also develop guidance on the use of AI in the media from the perspective of freedom of expression. So maybe there could be some fruitful discussions between the two committees. Within my team, we do a lot of research on the use of AI-driven tools in the media and also work on issues like cooperative responsibility. And I was very happy to see also that this report has made a very concrete step to taking this idea closer to practical implementation. So I was very impressed to see that. And the report addresses so many interesting issues that intersect with my work here, and that I would love to exchange views with you, but you crudely limited us to 5 minutes, so I focus only on one, and that is the aspect of user agency and human agency and the opportunities and risks for human agency. And in the report, you very rightly emphasized the importance of strong consent rights and the rights of contestation or redress. At the same time, you also raised questions about the potential of this reasonable consumer standard that underlies all of these rights. And you wonder to what extent this is actually providing an adequate benchmark for protection. We just finalized a study for the European consumer organization BIRG, where we look closer at this reasonable consumer standard, or rather the other side of it, the concept of digital vulnerability. As you know, in consumer law, the reasonable consumer is the norm and the vulnerable consumer is the exception. And the argument that we developed in the study is that we need to fundamentally reconsider this dichotomy and move away from this black and white reasonable vulnerable doer standard and think in terms of more universal digital vulnerability. And we find that in digital marketplaces, most, if not all, consumers are potentially vulnerable. So instead of singling out certain groups of vulnerable consumers, we need to accept that actually in the digital marketplace, most users / consumers / citizens are in a universal state of defensiveness and susceptibility to the exploitation of what you call data power. And so our study very much confirms your finding, namely that this digital reality makes the average consumer, each of us, a rather unrealistic prototype. So digital marketplaces and media places are by far no exceptions, are characterized by very structural power imbalances and choice architectures that are explicitly designed for exploiting data power and individual differences and biases. And viewing these developments from such a more universal digital vulnerability perspective will teach us that attempts of going for more human agency and empowering users vis-a-vis AI and the institutions using their technology is futile, as long as regulators do not also tackle the structural power imbalances and inequalities and institutional dependencies that are manifested in the architectures that we create here. And that has at least three implications I would briefly like to touch upon, and I think also for your work. The first one is giving users more rights, and agency is not always the best way to improve their agency. if that essentially means imposing the burden of realizing public values and finding their interests solely on these users. And unfortunately, this is something that I see more and more happening when we plead for more consumer rights and large companies plead for more regulation and rights of users, because a lot of evidence shows that people feel not agent enough to exercise these rights. And I think that's why we also should start thinking of reframing some of these rights not as rights that need to be invoked by consumers or users, but as obligations that must be complied with, which also involves a change of the burden of proof. And I think we need to talk more about the burden of proof. So for example, instead of expecting users to contest algorithms against unlawful forms of discrimination, there should be obligations, clear obligations on media companies to contest constantly their algorithms and test them for discrimination. Second, human agency requires choice. And especially in media markets, we see that users simply have no choice, because these media infrastructures, these platforms you're mentioning, they are the infrastructure of our daily life. And I think the past 9 months in a COVID lockdown have made that blatantly and very painfully clear. And this is also an aspect that is central in the work of the Council of Europe group. So addressing vulnerability and bringing fairness into the markets is not simply a question of more human agency, but it's a question of changing markets. And I'm very much looking forward to the European Commission's plans on the DSA and the review of the unfair commercial competition laws. I think that those are initiatives that will be very crucial for realizing true agency. So I think we need to approach agency more systemically. Finally, my last point, we need to understand the way this technology is used is often to establish long-lasting interactive trust relationships with users. And that these relationships are actually sources of vulnerability and power imbalances in themselves. If these technologies are used to gain more knowledge about users, more data, and with that also new means to manipulate behavior. Secondly, also research also shows that users tend to display almost naive trust in technology and automated decisions and personalized news recommendations. So I think if we move on with human agency, I think we need also to better understand the totally non-rational nature of these emerging algorithmic relationships between AI and humans. Those were some of my reflections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Very interesting to add to the discussion. As a third speaker, invited for this panel, I would like to ask Professor Napoli to give his take on this issue.